מסכת זבחים דף ע"ח דם שנתערה במים אם יש בו מרעית דם כשר. If you have blood of an offering, sacrificial blood that you want to sprinkle on the mizbeach, and it got mixed up with water, so does the water dilute the blood and you can no longer use it? Well, it depends how much there is. If it still looks like blood, then it's okay. So if there's too much water and it looks just like watery, like pinkish water, it doesn't look like blood anymore, then it's no good. But if there's only a little bit of water and it still looks like blood, then it's okay. So you go by the look of it. If the sacrificial blood got mixed up with wine, now the color of blood and wine is similar. So even if you have a lot of wine, it's still going to look the same. So how can you tell? What we do is we consider it as if the wine was water. If you had, let's say, 2-to-1 of wine versus blood, well, let's see. If it was that same ratio of water to blood, would it still look like blood or would it look too watery? So you use the same ratio. Whatever it is for water, that's what it will be for wine. And the same law is if sacrificial blood got mixed up with non-sacrificial blood or with blood from chaya, which cannot be sacrificed. In that case also, we consider as if the non-kosher blood were water, would it be sufficient to change the color of it? Well, then it's no good. But if it's not so much, and it would still look like blood had it been water, then the blood is still valid and can be used and put on the mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer and dam mebatel dam. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with this last law, and he says blood cannot nullify blood because that's min bemino. In order for something to be nullified, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there has to be a contrast between them. So wine and blood certainly contrast, different substances, different color. Even wine and blood still is a contrast because they're two different substances. But blood and blood, those are the same substance. Just one is permitted and one is not permitted. And therefore, min bemino is not batel. And even if it's just a little bit of non-valid blood, the non-valid blood will not be nullified, and you cannot use the mixture. Nitarev bedam pesulim yishafech le'ama, bedam atamsit yishafech le'ama. If blood, a sacrificial blood, was mixed with blood from a invalid sacrifice, like if the sacrifice was pigul, and then it gets mixed together, so nothing you could do about it. You have to throw it down the drain. There was a drain in the courtyard that all the liquids went down, so you have to throw it out. If the proper blood that you're supposed to put on the mizbeach, that is blood that that comes out right at the time of shechita, that squirts out immediately. That's dam hanefesh. That's what you're supposed to do, and that's what you're supposed to collect and put on the mizbeach. But the other blood that comes out later is called dam hatamsit. That is not sacrificial. However, if it gets mixed up, the dam hanefesh gets mixed up with dam hatamsit, also, you have to throw it down the drain. It's invalid. Rabbi Eliezer machshir. However, in the last case, Rabbi Eliezer says dam hatamsit gets mixed up with dam hanefesh. That's okay. Dam hatamsit is not as bad as dam pasul. It's not totally pasul like pigul. It's just not the proper thing to throw, but it won't make the whole mixture bad. You can still use it. Imlo nimlach v'natan kasher. Even Tanakama agrees with Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad. If the Kohen did not ask anyone and he already placed that mixture of dam hanefesh with dam hatamsit onto the mizbeach, the korban is valid b'diavad. Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela shenaflu mayim letoch dam. Aval nafal dam letoch mayim, rishon batel. Regarding the first case where you have blood and wine, so if you don't have too much blood and water, if you don't have too much water, it's okay, as long as it still looks like blood. Then it's permitted. So Rabbi Yochanan teaches that is true only if the water falls into the blood. You have the blood in the bottom basin, and some water falls into it. So not so much water, still looks like blood, it's valid. However, if the basin had the water in it and the blood streamed into the water, then we say, for every drop of blood that falls in, that is batel. In other words, take a snapshot. Right at that moment, when a little bit of blood falls into the water, it gets mixed up in it, and at that moment, certainly, it looks watery. There's only a little bit of blood in it. And that blood becomes nidche. It's nullified. And once it's nullified, it's permanently nullified. Then a little bit more blood comes in. That's also nullified. And the whole mixture is no good. And so as more and more blood comes in, it gets nullified. At some point, there'll be, if you put there's a lot of blood, there'll be so much blood, and it will definitely look like blood again. The problem is, even though now, after all this blood fell in, it looks like blood, yes, it's true, but because the blood came in within a stream, and so it became batel, it became nullified bit by bit, now all of that is permanently nullified and doesn't come back to be kosher. So therefore, that would be prohibited even if it looked like blood. The leniency is only if the water fell in to the blood. Amar Papa ulinyan kisui enoken lefi shen dechui b'mitzvot. Rav Papa says this stringency here that Rabbi Yochanan said is only regarding using that blood as sacrificial blood to put on the mizbeach. But there's another law that is required for blood, and that is if you do shechita on a bird or a haya, you have to cover the blood with dirt. Now, what if you have the blood that is comes out of the bird? And let's say that falls into water, and before you get to cover it with dirt, falls into water, and it keeps falling into water, and so now it's all watery. Okay, so you say, well, it's very watery, so does that mean I don't have to cover it? And he says, no, that's not true, because we don't apply dichui, we don't say it's nullified when it comes to mitzvot. We only say the law of nullification when it comes to putting something on the mizbeach. It's invalid to put on the mizbeach. Once it's invalid, it's permanently invalid. But regarding the mitzvah, this is blood, and you have to cover the blood with dirt. And just because it fell into water, and at first it was very watery, so it wasn't considered blood, but eventually more blood came in, and now it looks like blood, it's blood, and you still have to fulfill the commandment of covering it up. Amar Resh Lakish, hapigul v'hanotan v'tameh shebelalan ze bazeh v'achalan patur. Resh Lakish said, if someone took 3 pieces of meat, one is prohibited because of pigul, other prohibited because of notad, and the other is, these are all sacrificial meat that's now prohibited because of tameh. You're not allowed to eat any of these. But if you mixed it up and ate them all together, you have a kazayit of each. Now, if you eat one alone, you would get lashes. But if you mix them all together, each of them has a kazait by itself, and you eat them all together, then he's patur, he's not liable to lashes. Why? It's impossible that one was not a little bit more than the other, and so let's say there's a little bit more pigul compared to notad. Well, then the notad will be nullified in the face of the pigul, and so you can't get lashes for the notad. Or it might be the other way around, or it might be that the tameh is more than the pigul. And so we don't know which one is a little bit more and a little bit less. And therefore, what are you going to give him lashes on? You have to have a warning for lashes. So the guy's giving a warning, hey, you better not eat that because it's pigul. Yeah, but maybe the pigul was a little bit less than the tameh, and therefore it didn't actually, the prohibition of pigul became nullified by the prohibition of tameh. In other words, that meat, we go by the majority. Just like you go by the majority when it comes to something that's kosher and not kosher, you follow the majority. So too, you follow the majority, even though all 3 are not kosher, but they're different types of not kosher. So you can't give this person a warning and can't give him lashes for any particular of these 3 prohibitions. Shema mina telat. Resh Lakish says, or the Gemara says, we can learn 3 things from the law of Resh Lakish. Number 1, Shema mina isurin v'batelin ze et ze. Number 1, prohibited foods can nullify each other. We don't just put them all into one category of prohibited foods, but if there's more pigul over notad, then you don't get punished as notad anymore, only for pigul, and vice versa. Ushma mina noten tam berov lav deoraita. And furthermore, if something gives taste, in this case, it could be that the pigul is very tasty, and would give taste to the other too. So even if the pigul is not the majority, maybe it gives taste to the other ones, and therefore, if you said that taste is giving taste is prohibited mideoraita, then it wouldn't matter if one was physically a smaller piece of meat than the other, the fact that it gives taste to the other and the other gives taste to it. So should make it prohibited and punishable mideoraita just for giving taste. So in other words, if you had something that was like a smaller piece, let's say kosher or not kosher, and it was a smaller piece, but it was very tasty and give taste to the other one, so there's taste in the majority of it, you'd get the lashes. If you said that, then in this case you would get lashes, but we don't get lashes for this. Therefore, we learn that just the fact that something prohibited gives taste to the majority of it is not sufficient, is not a prohibited, that would not be punishable midoraita. Ushma min hatra'at safek lo shema hatra'ah. And we also learned that a warning that's of doubt, you say, listen, when you eat that, you might be liable to pigul. You might be liable to notad. I don't really know, because I don't really know which one is the majority and which one's the minority. You don't call that a proper warning if it's a warning that's based on uncertainty. A proper warning for which you can get lashes has to be one that you say, I know that what you're eating is prohibited. I know there's a shiur of it. I know that if you eat that, you'll get lashes. Then, if he eats it anyway, he gets lashes. But here there's uncertainty, and that's why he does not get lashes. We challenge the middle rule here regarding taste from the following Mishnah in Masechet Hala, Mativ Rava, Asa Isa min Haitin, Umin Seorin. Let's say someone makes a big piece of dough, combining wheat flour and rice flour. Now, you have to take challah only from wheat flour, not from rice flour. But now it's a mixture, so what do we say? Im yesh ba tam dagan, hayabet behala, v'afagav deruba orez. So we go by taste here, not by the majority. You think you go by the majority. No. If you taste the dough and it says, taste like wheat, then you have to take challah, even if the majority is actually the rice flour, but maybe the wheat flour is a stronger taste. So we see here that this is on a deoraita level, because we're assuming you have to take challah deoraita here, and this would mean that something that gives taste into the majority is considered deoraita. So that goes against the second principle that we learned here. And the answer is midrabanan. When this Mishnah says that you have to take challah, this is only challah midrabanan. But you're right. In fact, in a doraita level, we would not go by the taste. But this is wrong, because the continuation of the Mishnah says, The continuation of the Mishnah says that one can eat this as matzah on Pesach. If you make matzah out of a combination of wheat flour and rice flour, even though the rice flour is a majority, but it tastes like wheat flour, you can use it for matzah on Pesach night. And therefore, that must be that it's called mideoraita. And so you can't say it's only midrabanan. So now we're back to the question. It seems here that we follow the taste of something. The taste of something that goes into the majority is considered the majority, even if that thing is the minority. That's against the second conclusion that we had from Resh Lakish. Ela min b'she'eno mino beta'ama, min b'mino beruba. Rather, we qualify Resh Lakish's rule, that second rule. That's if it depends. If it's min b'she'eno mino, if it's two different tastes, that would be the case of the wheat flour and the rice flour. Those are two different types of produce. And so if it's two different types, then we follow the taste. But if it's min bemino, if it's all the same type of item, and that would be the case of Resh Lakish, where he's talking about three different meats, and they're all meat, they're all min bemino, they're just different prohibitions. In that case, we follow the majority of the mass of the substance of the meat, and we do not follow the taste. And so Resh Lakish is correct when he said that we don't follow the taste, that midoraita, it doesn't matter if one gives a lot of taste, but rather we only follow the majority of the volume. That's when it's min bimino, which is the case he was talking about. And that does not apply to the case of the Mishnah regarding the orez, the wheat flour and the rice flour, because that's min b'she'eno mino. If it's different types of items, then you're right. The prohibited taste will, if it goes into the majority, will define the majority. The Gemara now challenges this distinction and asks, Un sha'er min b'mino, kemin b'she'eno mino. Why are you saying that min b'mino you follow the rov, and only min b'she'eno mino then you go by the taste? Why not? If it's min b'mino, it's true, it's the same thing, and it's going to look the same and taste the same. But why not say that we treat it as if, and we will estimate min b'mino as if it was min she'eno b'mino, and then keep following ta'ama and not just rov. And here's the proof that we should do that is from our Mishnah. Ditnan, nitareb beyayin ro'in oto ki'ilu hu mayim. My love ro'in oto layayin ki'ilu hu mayim. And our Mishnah says if sacrificial blood gets mixed up with wine, we consider it as if it were water. Now, what's the it that we are considering? Is it not that we consider the wine as if it were water? So here you have min b'mino. Now, it's true, there are two different substances. Wine and blood are different substances and they taste different. But for this purpose, we're not looking at the taste. We don't care about the taste. We care about the look of it. That's the important thing. And they look the same. They are the same color. So therefore, this is min b'mino. And yet, we don't just say rov. Instead, we say we consider it as if it were water. So why not say the same thing and min b'mino, consider it as if it were min b'she'eno mino? We answer, La ro'inoto ladam ki'ilu hu mayim. When the Mishnah says we consider it as if it were water, it's not the wine that we're considering like water, but rather the blood. We consider the blood as if it were water. And then it would just be batel in a simple majority. But that doesn't read well. Ihachi batel mi ba'eleh. Then it should say just batel. Why would you say consider it as if it's water? Just say batel. If you have wine and blood, then if there's any more blood than wine, then it's nullified. That would have been a simpler way to say it. So therefore, in fact, you can't read the Mishnah like that. The Mishnah is a good example of min b'mino. We consider it as if it's min b'she'eno mino. Ve'od, and another source, we're going to see the source quoted fully soon, but it's talking about a case where you have a bucket or some kind of vessel that's tameh, and you want to make it tahor. Now, you could just simply insert it into the Milk-veh. That would be fine. The problem is that there's some liquid in it. Now, if the liquid in the vessel was water, that would also be fine, because even if it's full of water, as soon as the water inside the vessel touches the Milk-veh water, then it all becomes one. And then as long as the vessel goes down underneath the water, that's fine. But here we're talking about where the vessel is full of white wine or milk, which is white and looks kind of like water. And so that would be an interposition. If let's say it's all full of white wine or all full of milk, then the Milk-veh water is not getting into the inside. That would be a problem. What if it's only partially full? So here's what the Baraita says. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ro'ino to ki'ilu hu yain adom, im tehamarehu kasher. We consider that milk or white wine that's in the bucket as if it were red wine. And then we dunk it in, and then we estimate if the appearance of that red wine would be pale because there's more water coming into the bucket and making it pale, then it's considered kosher, it's tahor. Ve'im lav pasul. But if you would replace, conceptually replace that white wine with red wine, and you dunked it in, and there's so much red wine that even the new water, Milk-veh water that comes in and fills in, the rest of the bucket would not make it pale, it would still look like wine, then it's no good. So here is another case where it's min b'mino. White wine or milk and water are both whitish, and therefore that's min b'mino. But we don't say rov, but rather we consider it as if it's min b'she'eno mino. So a second challenge against the distinction that we made over here. And the answer is Tana'ehi. In fact, it's a machloket Tanaim. And you can see that if you quote the full Baraita. The Tanya, Deli, sheyesh bo yain lavan o halav hitbilo, according to Tanakama, if you have a bucket that has white wine or milk in it, and you dunk it into a Milk-veh, Now, so you dunk it in, and then it's half full or quarter full or whatever with milk, and 3/4 full, and so you dunk it in. So we go by the majority. As long as the water that from the Milk-veh that comes into the bucket will be the majority over the wine, the white wine or the milk, then it's valid tevilah and it's tahor, otherwise not. So we see that according to Tanakama, when it's min b'mino, we follow the Rav. And so this would be consistent with the statement of Resh Lakish over here. The statement based on Resh Lakish's law. Rabbi Yehuda omer ro'in oto kilu hu yain adom im deha mar'ehu kasher v'im lav pasul. And Rabbi Yehuda, he is the minority opinion, and he's the one that says that if we consider the white wine to be as if it were red wine, and then if the color changes and gets pale, then the tevilah is valid, otherwise it's not valid. And so now we can line up and see that the Tanakama in our Mishnah that says that when blood and wine mix together, we consider the wine as if it were water. That is actually the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says we consider it to be different, and so that explains the first question that we asked from our Mishnah. That line in our Mishnah is actually Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, in our Mishnah, it actually does cite Rabbi Yehuda later on as well, in the case of invalid blood. So and there is a machloket over there that says en dam mevatel dam if it's invalid blood. So there's the Tanakama and the Rabbi Yehuda disagree with that case. Nitarev bedam behema or bedam haya rinoto kilu mayim, and the Rabbi Yehuda says no, that's min bimino. Then we do not do that. So that's true that there is a machloket. But this line of where it's wine and blood, that is actually according to this answer, this line itself is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We'll see a further question on this, but we'll leave that to the next daf. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.